The school gymnasium was decorated with blue and gold banners, folding chairs lined up in perfect rows, and proud parents filling every corner. The air buzzed with excitement, yet one corner of the room held a heavier silence. Isabella Sterling sat in her wheelchair, her graduation gown draped neatly across her lap. Her long dark hair was brushed to perfection, but her eyes held a loneliness that no amount of ceremony could hide. Students grouped together with their families, laughing and snapping photos. Isabella sat apart, her smile tight, as if she were trying not to notice the distance. Victoria Sterling, CEO of a multinational corporation, stood near the back of the room, surrounded by colleagues who had insisted on attending. Her tailored suit and commanding presence drew stares, but her eyes stayed on her daughter. For all her success, she could not bridge the one gap that mattered: Isabella's isolation. Victoria had hired nurses, assistants, even companions, but her daughter often rejected them. Isabella wanted friends, not employees. And here, at her graduation, surrounded by classmates, pairing off with families, the absence felt unbearable. Across the room, Ethan Hayes adjusted the ties on his twin daughters' dresses. Sophie fidgeted, bouncing on her toes, while Chloe clung shyly to his arm. They were 7 years old, mirror images of each other, with soft curls and curious hazel eyes, though their personalities could not have been more different. Sophie was bold, always the first to ask questions, while Chloe preferred to hang back, observing the world quietly. Ethan, a single father, had learned to balance their energies, steadying Sophie's fire and drawing Chloe gently out of her shell. They were not supposed to be at the graduation. Ethan's niece was among the graduates, and he had brought the girls to support her. He expected the ceremony to be long, maybe boring for his daughters, but he knew the importance of showing up for family. He settled into the folding chair with Sophie on one side, Chloe on the other, and handed them programs to keep them distracted. But it wasn't the speeches or the music that captured his girl's attention. It was the girl alone in the wheelchair, dressed in her gown, pretending she didn't notice everyone else's joy. Sophie tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Daddy, why is she sitting by herself?" Ethan followed her gaze, and his chest tightened when he saw Isabella. She was poised, clearly strong, yet so painfully alone. He hesitated, unsure whether it was his place to interfere. "Maybe she just wants some space," he said quietly. Chloe frowned, but she looked sad. The girls exchanged a glance, twin intuition buzzing between them. Sophie whispered, "We should talk to her." Chloe bit her lip, but nodded. Ethan felt the weight of their words. Children often saw truths adults ignored. Isabella tried to keep her eyes forward, listening to the speeches, but her gaze drifted toward the clusters of families taking pictures. Laughter bubbled up around her, and her stomach knotted. She wanted to be happy it was her graduation. After all, but the loneliness pressed harder with every passing moment. Her wheelchair felt like a wall, separating her from a world that moved on without her. She didn't notice Ethan's daughters approaching until Sophie cleared her throat. Isabella blinked, startled, as the two identical girls stood nervously in front of her, small hands linked together for courage. "Hi," Sophie said brightly, her boldness overcoming her nerves. "I'm Sophie, and this is my sister Chloe." Chloe gave a small wave, her cheeks pink. Isabella blinked again, unsure how to respond. Most children avoided her chair, unsure of what to say, but these girls looked at her as if she were no different than anyone else. "I'm Isabella," she said softly. Sophie grinned. "We saw you sitting alone. Can we sit with you?" Isabella's throat tightened. She nodded quickly, and the twins pulled up chairs, settling beside her without hesitation. For the first time all evening, Isabella smiled. From across the gym, Victoria noticed the change instantly. Her daughter's face, which had been taut with restraint all evening, softened into something genuine. She followed Isabella's gaze and saw the twins chattering beside her, one animated, the other listening attentively. Victoria's eyes shifted further and landed on the man, watching them. A tall figure in a simple shirt, his posture relaxed but protective. He caught her glance for a second, nodded politely, then turned his attention back to the girls. Something about him felt different. Victoria, who had built her empire by judging people quickly, couldn't read him. The ceremony ended with applause, caps tossed in the air, and proud parents swarming the stage for photos. Isabella clutched her diploma, tears pricking her eyes not from sadness, but from gratitude. Sophie insisted on taking a selfie with her, Chloe carefully making sure Isabella's cap was straight before the picture. They made her feel part of something, if only for a moment. Ethan walked over, standing tall beside his daughters. "I hope they weren't bothering you," he said gently. Isabella shook her head quickly. "No, they made tonight better." Ethan smiled softly, and his girls beamed with pride. Victoria approached cautiously, heels clicking on the gym floor. She placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder, offering her daughter the warmth of presence. Isabella squeezed her mother's hand but didn't let go of the twins. "These are Sophie and Chloe," she told her mother. Victoria's eyes flicked to Ethan again, assessing. "Thank you," she said carefully. Ethan inclined his head. "They just wanted to say hello." Victoria studied him for another beat, then returned her focus to her daughter. For the first time in years, she saw Isabella glowing, and it was because of strangers, not wealth, not connections. As families began to leave, Ethan prepared to guide his daughters home. Sophie whispered, "Can we stay with Isabella a little longer?" Chloe nodded silently, eyes pleading. Ethan hesitated, then looked at Isabella. She was watching them with a hopeful expression she tried to hide. He sighed, smiling faintly. "All right, a few more minutes." The girls cheered quietly and went back to chatting with Isabella, asking about her favorite books and colors. Ethan stood nearby, hands in his pockets, watching the three girls laugh together as if they'd known each other forever. Something stirred in him, something he hadn't expected. Victoria observed silently. She had built walls to protect herself and her daughter from pity, criticism, and disappointment. Yet, here were two little girls who had slipped past every barrier, reaching Isabella without effort. And their father, he didn't hover out of discomfort or obligation. He trusted his daughters, letting them be themselves. It struck Victoria with surprising force. He wasn't raising them with fear, but with freedom. She wondered what kind of man that made him. For a fleeting second, she wished she knew, but CEOs didn't ask strangers about their lives. Or at least, she never had. Later that night, in her limousine, Victoria replayed the image of Isabella laughing with the twins. Her daughter had been through years of therapy, countless specialists, and endless attempts to make her feel included. None of it worked the way a simple act of kindness had. Victoria leaned back, staring at the city lights through the window. Who was this man? Why had his daughters been able to reach Isabella when no one else could? She tapped her phone, instructing her assistant to find out. For once, this wasn't about business. It was about something far more personal. Meanwhile, Ethan tucked Sophie and Chloe into bed. Sophie chattered about how brave Isabella was, while Chloe whispered that she hoped Isabella wasn't lonely anymore. Ethan kissed their foreheads, pride swelling in his chest. He had taught them to be kind, to notice people others overlooked, but watching them live, it was different. He sat in the quiet apartment after they fell asleep, reflecting on the evening. He hadn't expected to notice the CEO's sharp gaze, or to feel the weight of her presence, but it was Isabella's smile and his daughter's joy that lingered in his heart. The next day at work, Ethan's co-workers were buzzing about the Sterling graduation. "Did you hear Victoria Sterling was there? Her daughter's paralyzed, poor thing," one whispered. Ethan kept silent, but his mind returned to Isabella. She wasn't poor thing. She was strong, dignified, and far more than her chair. Sophie and Chloe had seen that immediately. He wished the world would too. He thought about how quickly they had connected with her, and for the first time in years, Ethan wondered what their lives might look like with more people in it, people who truly understood. Victoria arrived at her office that morning to find an email from her assistant. Attached was a short file. Ethan Hayes, widower, father of 2, former paramedic, steady employment, modest income. No scandals. Victoria scanned the report twice, unsettled by her own curiosity. She wasn't used to caring about strangers' backgrounds. Yet something about him, about the way he had let his daughters approach Isabella without hesitation, gnawed at her thoughts. She remembered the way he nodded at her, unbothered by who she was. It irritated her and intrigued her. CEOs were rarely intrigued, but this father had unsettled her order. Isabella, however, wasn't thinking about reputations or files. She woke that morning with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She replayed Sophie's silly jokes, Chloe's shy smile, the way they had included her without pause. For once, she didn't feel like the girl in the wheelchair. She just felt like Isabella. When Victoria asked how she felt about the ceremony, Isabella answered simply, "It was the best day." Victoria froze at the words, realizing they had come not because of speeches, gowns, or her own presence, but because of 2 little girls with ribbons in their hair. That afternoon, Victoria surprised Isabella by asking, "Would you like to see Sophie and Chloe again?" Isabella's eyes widened, then softened with hope. "Could we?" Victoria hesitated. She had never been one to invite strangers into their world, but she remembered Isabella's laughter and her own helplessness watching her daughters suffer. For the first time, she wondered if the Sterling Empire, with all its power, had failed to give Isabella the one thing she truly needed: connection. "I'll see what I can do," Victoria said. Isabella smiled quietly, her heart already lifting. The seed had been planted. Ethan received the call 2 days later. It was Victoria herself, her voice smooth but formal, inviting him and his daughters to a small gathering at her home. Ethan nearly declined. He disliked attention and mistrusted motives. But Sophie and Chloe overheard, squealing at the thought of seeing Isabella again. Their excitement tipped the balance. Ethan agreed reluctantly, though he wondered what kind of world he was stepping into. He didn't know yet that this invitation was the start of something much larger, a crossing of lives that would test not only him and Victoria, but their daughters as well. Victoria's home was nothing like Ethan expected. The Sterling estate stretched across manicured lawns, fountains catching the sunlight, and windows so tall they seemed to look down on visitors. Sophie gasped, clutching Chloe's hand, while Ethan parked his modest sedan beside gleaming luxury cars. "Daddy," Sophie whispered, It looks like a castle, Chloe added softly. Do you think Isabella is happy here? Ethan didn't answer. The grandeur felt overwhelming, but when Isabella appeared at the doorway, her smile erased the intimidation. She wheeled forward eagerly, waving, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the twins. Inside, the girls quickly settled into Isabella's room, where shelves brimmed with books and a wall displayed photographs of travels she hadn't been able to finish. Sophie chattered excitedly, asking about each picture, while Chloe leaned closer to examine Isabella's drawings. You're really good at this, Chloe murmured, pointing to a sketch of the ocean. Isabella blushed. No one usually lingered over her hobbies. Victoria watched from the doorway, astonished. Her daughter, so often guarded, was laughing, sharing, alive. The twins weren't treating her like porcelain, they were treating her like a friend. Ethan stood near the window, hands in his pockets, scanning the room with a quiet watchfulness. He wasn't used to luxury, but he was even less used to seeing his daughters so immediately at ease with someone new. Sophie was showing Isabella a silly hand game. Chloe was leaning in close, smiling in her soft, shy way. For months, Ethan had worried that the girls were missing something without their mother, a warmth he couldn't provide alone. But watching Isabella, he realized connection came in unexpected ways. Maybe this friendship was exactly what they all needed. Victoria approached him carefully. They've made quite an impression, she said, her voice softer than in the boardroom. Ethan nodded. They see people for who they are, not what others think. His tone was matter-of-fact, not boastful. Victoria studied him, curious about the man who spoke so simply yet carried such weight. She had spent her life surrounded by people who tried to impress her, manipulate her, or fear her. Ethan did none of those things. He seemed focused only on his daughters, and yet his words had shifted something in her. She found herself strangely unsettled. Over dinner, conversation flowed easier than expected. The twins insisted on sitting beside Isabella, helping her reach dishes, making sure she didn't feel left out. Sophie told wild stories that had everyone laughing, while Chloe added quiet details that made Isabella giggle even more. Victoria, usually rigid at the table, found herself relaxing. Ethan was polite, but not deferential, guiding his daughters gently, answering questions with sincerity. For the first time in years, Victoria realized she was enjoying dinner not as a performance, but as a shared experience. The Sterling dining room felt less like a stage. Later that night, after the guests had gone, Victoria lingered in the empty dining hall. She remembered Isabella's laughter echoing against the marble walls and felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. For years, she had tried to engineer happiness for her daughter through resources and influence, yet joy had entered her home, not through wealth, but through the kindness of two little girls and their father. She stood by the window, unsettled by the realization that all her power had never achieved what Ethan's family had done in a single evening. Meanwhile, Ethan tucked Sophie and Chloe into bed back at their apartment. Sophie gushed about Isabella's drawings. Chloe whispered that Isabella had the prettiest laugh. Ethan smiled, brushing hair from their foreheads. You two made her feel special tonight, he said softly. Sophie grinned. Because she is. Chloe nodded firmly. She's our friend now. Ethan sat back, listening to their breathing as they drifted off. He realized he wasn't just proud of their kindness, he was grateful. They had opened a door that he never would have approached alone, and through it came something brighter than he expected. The following weeks brought more visits. Sometimes Isabella came to their small apartment, where she colored with the twins at the kitchen table or watched cartoons sprawled on the worn couch. Other times, the girls returned to the Sterling estate, marveling at the endless gardens. Wherever they were, laughter followed. Victoria observed closely, her sharp eyes softening as she saw her daughter blossom. But she also noticed Ethan, the patience in his voice, the way he guided without smothering, his quiet strength. For the first time, Victoria felt her curiosity shift into admiration, and admiration was dangerous for someone like her. One afternoon, when Isabella visited their apartment, she asked to help bake cookies. Sophie declared herself head chef, while Chloe carefully measured flour. Ethan guided them with practiced patience, letting Isabella stir despite her limited movement. When the cookies emerged golden, the three girls cheered as if they had conquered the world. Isabella bit into one and closed her eyes, savoring the taste. "I've never done this before," she admitted. Sophie gasped. "We have to fix that. You'll bake with us every time now." Isabella's laugh filled the room, and Victoria, arriving late, stood frozen at the door. Victoria had never seen her daughter look so free. Isabella wasn't just smiling, she was radiant, glowing in a way no therapist or specialist had managed to achieve. Victoria's gaze shifted to Ethan, who was wiping flour from Sophie's nose while Chloe giggled beside him. He hadn't noticed her arrival, too absorbed in the moment. For years, Victoria had believed strength meant control, dominance, authority. But watching Ethan with his girls, she realized true strength looked different. It looked like patience, tenderness, and love so steady it could hold others up without trying. The friendship between Isabella and the twins became a fixture. They celebrated small victories together: Sophie's school award, Chloe's art project, Isabella's therapy milestones. Each celebration ended in shared meals, laughter, and sometimes tears. Ethan found himself drawn deeper into their world, though he kept reminding himself to stay cautious. Victoria was powerful, complicated, and far above his world. But each time their eyes met across a room, when Sophie was braiding Isabella's hair, or when Chloe tucked a drawing into Isabella's bag, something unspoken passed between them. It was fragile, dangerous, and undeniable. Yet not everyone approved. Some of Victoria's colleagues whispered that the CEO was compromising her image by spending time with a single father and his children. "It looks sentimental," one advisor muttered. Victoria brushed them off with icy precision, but their words lingered. Ethan faced similar whispers from neighbors who wondered why the Sterlings kept visiting their modest apartment. He ignored them, focusing only on Sophie and Chloe's happiness. Still, he couldn't deny the tension rising between two worlds, one built on marble and influence, the other on simplicity and quiet resilience. Could they ever truly fit together? One rainy evening, Ethan found himself sitting with Victoria in her study while the girls played upstairs. The storm outside rattled the windows, but inside, the room was hushed. Victoria poured tea, her hands unusually unsteady. "I don't know how to thank you," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up. "For what?" She exhaled sharply. "For giving Isabella what I couldn't. Connection. Joy." Ethan shook his head. "That wasn't me. It was Sophie and Chloe. Kids don't see walls the way we do." Victoria stared at him, realizing he lived with a kind of wisdom she'd spent her life chasing. The conversation lingered long after the storm passed. Victoria found herself asking about his late wife, about how he managed as a single father. Ethan answered quietly, with honesty but without self-pity. She told him about her struggles raising Isabella alone, about the pressure of empire and motherhood colliding. They were two people from different worlds, yet in that moment, the distance felt smaller. Upstairs, Isabella and the twins laughed so loudly it echoed through the house. For once, Victoria and Ethan didn't feel like CEO and outsider. They felt like parents sharing the same fragile hope. Weeks turned into months. The girls' friendship only deepened, and with it, the bond between Ethan and Victoria. At Isabella's next therapy session, Sophie and Chloe clapped wildly when she managed a new movement. "You did it!" Sophie shouted, while Chloe hugged her tightly. Ethan caught Victoria's eye, and for once, they both allowed themselves to smile openly. The change was undeniable. Their daughters weren't just friends, they were building something larger, weaving two families into one fabric without asking permission. And though Ethan and Victoria hadn't spoken the words, they both knew. Life was shifting. The true test came at Isabella's next milestone, a small award ceremony recognizing her perseverance in school. Victoria, always stoic at public events, felt her throat tighten when Isabella wheeled onto the stage, Sophie and Chloe cheering louder than anyone. Ethan stood beside them, steady as ever, his daughter's excitement spilling into the room. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, but for once, Victoria didn't care about headlines. She looked at Ethan, saw the pride mirrored in his eyes, and realized she didn't want this to be temporary. For the first time, she wondered what it might mean to let him in. That night, after the girls fell asleep, Victoria walked Ethan to the door. The city glittered below them, lights shimmering through glass walls. She hesitated, uncharacteristically unsure. "You've changed our lives," she admitted. Ethan shook his head. "We just showed up." Victoria searched his face, looking for doubt, pride, or motive. She found none, only honesty. It scared her. She had built her empire by controlling every outcome, yet here was a man who had shifted her world simply by being present. She wanted to tell him more, but the words stayed locked. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." When Ethan drove home that night, Sophie and Chloe slept peacefully in the back seat, their small hands still clutching ribbons Isabella had given them. He glanced at them in the mirror, his heart heavy and full all at once. He didn't know what the future held. Victoria's world was vast and complicated. His was small and steady. But for his daughters and for Isabella, he would keep showing up. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to bridge the distance. Somewhere inside him, a hope he hadn't allowed in years began to grow, quiet but persistent,